They didn't just park on my land, they cut their way into it like it didn't belong to anyone, like it was just empty space waiting to be used. And I'll be honest, at first I thought maybe I was overreacting until I realized they hadn't made a mistake, they had made a decision. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to argue. I was going to make a point they wouldn't forget. My name's Daniel Harper, and I live just outside a small town in western Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everybody pretends to mind their business but somehow still knows yours. I bought my property about 8 years ago, nothing fancy, just a modest house with a stretch of open field beside it. About 2 acres of grass that I never really did much with except keep it trimmed and enjoy the quiet. That field, it wasn't just land to me. It was the reason I moved out there in the first place. Space, privacy, breathing room, something you don't realize you need until you finally have it. Now, about 6 months before all this happened, the lot next to mine got sold. It had been empty for years, overgrown and forgotten. But then one day the machines showed up, bulldozers, trucks, crews working sunup to sundown. Turns out a guy named Victor Langston bought it, planned to open this upscale barbecue place, something modern rustic, he called it, which I guess means charging city prices in a town where people still fix their own trucks. I didn't have a problem with it at first. Honestly, I figured it might even be nice, somewhere close to grab dinner, maybe bring friends when they visited. But then the construction started creeping closer to my side. Not crossing the line exactly, but close enough that I went and had my survey papers double-checked just to be sure. Everything was still mine, exactly where it should be, but I remember thinking, this guy's pushing it. A couple weeks before opening, I ran into Victor for the first time. He was standing out there in a pressed shirt that didn't match the dust around him, talking into his phone like everything was urgent. When he hung up, I introduced myself, told him I lived next door. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't really land polite, but already halfway gone. "Hey, neighbor," he said, glancing past me more than at me. "You'll love the place. We're bringing something special out here." I nodded, said I hoped it worked out for him. Then he gestured vaguely toward my field and said, almost casually, "You ever thought about doing something with that space? Feels like a missed opportunity." I remember chuckling a little, thinking he was joking. "Yeah," I said, "I use it. It's called not having people on it." He didn't laugh, just gave me this look, like he was already calculating something, then said, "Well, if you ever change your mind, let me know. Parking's always a challenge with these things." That was the first moment something didn't sit right, not enough to act on, just enough to remember. Opening night came on a Friday. I hadn't planned on going, figured I'd wait a week or two until the crowd died down. That evening I drove into town, picked up a few things, took my time, and by the time I headed back it was already dark. As I turned onto my road, I could see the glow from the restaurant before I even saw the building, string lights, headlights, movement. It looked like a fair had set up overnight. But then I noticed something else, lights where there shouldn't have been any. At first I thought maybe cars were parked along the roadside, but as I got closer, I realized those headlights were deeper and too deep. My stomach tightened a little, that quiet kind of warning you don't always listen to but never ignore either. I slowed down, turned into my driveway, and just sat there for a second, engine running, looking out toward my field. There were cars, a lot of them, neatly lined up, like someone had planned it. SUVs, sedans, even a couple of pickup trucks, all sitting where, just that morning, there had been nothing but open grass. I got out slowly, shut the door, and started walking toward the edge of the property. The music from the restaurant carried over, mixed with laughter and voices, but out there by the fence line it felt strangely separate, like I had stepped into a different scene entirely. And then I saw it. My fence wasn't knocked down. It wasn't leaning or broken from pressure. It had been cut, clean, deliberate, the wires sliced through and folded back like someone opening a gate they didn't own. The posts were still standing, the line still there, but the message was clear. Someone had decided this boundary didn't apply anymore. I stood there for a while, just looking at it, letting it settle in. Because here's the thing, accidents look messy. This didn't. This looked intentional. I walked along the opening, stepping carefully around tire tracks that pressed deep into the ground. You could see exactly how they'd done it, cut the fence, driven in, then organized the cars like it was a legitimate lot. There had to be at least 30 vehicles out there, maybe more. For a second, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so bold it almost didn't make sense. Who does that? Who looks at someone else's land and just takes it? But then I thought about that conversation. Parking's always a challenge. And suddenly, it made perfect sense. I turned toward the restaurant, the noise getting louder as I got closer. People were lined up outside, others standing around with drinks, talking, enjoying themselves. To them, this was just a good night out. No idea they were standing 10 yards away from a problem they were about to be part of. Inside, it was packed. Music playing, servers weaving through the crowd, the smell of smoked meat hanging in the air. I scanned the room until I spotted someone who looked like they were in charge, a guy behind the bar, moving with purpose but not urgency. I walked up and waited until he noticed me. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice even. "Those cars outside, in the field next door. You know whose property that is?" He glanced up, barely interested, then shrugged. "Yeah, people park there. It's easier." I let that sit for a second. "It's my land." That got a little more attention, but not much. He leaned in slightly, like we were discussing something minor. "Look, man, opening night, we're slammed. It's just grass. Nobody's hurting anything. Just grass." I remember that part clearly, the way he said it like it solved everything. I nodded once slow. "Grass grows on land," I said, "and land belongs to someone." He didn't respond to that, just straightened up, already turning to the next customer, conversation over in his mind. And that was the moment I stopped thinking about talking it out. I didn't raise my voice, didn't argue. I just turned around and walked out, past the crowd, past the lights, back toward the dark edge of my property where those cars were still sitting like they had every right to be there. Because if they thought it was just grass, then they were about to learn exactly what it wasn't. I didn't go back inside, didn't try to find the owner, didn't even look at those cars again right away, because by then the decision had already been made. And I've learned over the years that once you reach that point, the smartest thing you can do is slow down, go quiet, and do things properly. Anger gets loud, but control, that's what actually gets results. So I walked back to my house, same steady pace, hands in my pockets, like nothing had changed, but everything had. The music faded behind me, replaced by that familiar stillness I'd moved out there for in the first place. For a second, standing on my porch, I just listened, wind moving through the grass, distant laughter, engines idling where they shouldn't have been. And I remember thinking, you really picked the wrong place to try this. Inside, the house felt calm, untouched, like it had no idea what was happening just beyond its walls. I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, took a slow sip, then set it down and headed for the small desk in the corner of the living room. Bottom drawer, the one most people ignore until they need something important. I pulled it open and took out a folder, thick, worn at the edges from being handled more times than I could count over the years. Survey maps, property lines, deed documentation, everything clean, official, unmistakable. I laid it out on the table and looked at it for a moment, tracing the boundary with my finger like I was reminding myself of something I already knew. Then I picked up my phone. The first call was to the non-emergency police line. Calm voice, clear explanation, no exaggeration, no emotion, just facts. My property's been entered without permission. Fence was cut. Vehicles are currently parked inside the boundary. The dispatcher asked a couple of routine questions, tone neutral, like they'd heard variations of this before, but when I mentioned the fence being cut, there was a slight pause. "An officer will come out and take a look," she said. "Thank you," I replied, and hung up. The second call, that one mattered more. There's a towing company about 15 minutes out, family-run, the kind of place that doesn't waste time asking unnecessary questions as long as the paperwork checks out. I'd used them once years back when someone abandoned a car near my driveway. The owner, Rick, picked up on the second ring. "Rick's Towing." "Hey, Rick, this is Daniel Harper out on Ridge Road." "Yeah, I remember you. What's going on?" I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice steady. "I've got about 30 unauthorized vehicles parked on my property. I've got documentation. Police are on the way. I need them removed." There was a brief silence, not hesitation, just calculation. "How fast you need us?" "As fast as you can get here." He let out a low breath, almost like a whistle. "All right, give me 20 minutes. I'll bring a couple trucks, call in a few more." "Appreciate it." "No problem. We'll take care of it." I ended the call and stood there for a second, phone still in my hand. That was the moment it became real, not just frustration, Not just a boundary crossed, but a response in motion. The third call was quick. Insurance agent, just to document the fence damage. No urgency there, just making sure everything was recorded properly. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people only respect consequences when they're written down. By the time I stepped back outside, I could already see headlights approaching from down the road, big ones, high beams cutting through the dark. The first tow truck turned in slow, engine rumbling deep, followed by another, then another behind it. It wasn't loud chaos, it was organized, deliberate. Right behind them, a police cruiser rolled in, lights off but presence unmistakable. The officer stepped out, flashlight in hand, calm, observant, the kind of demeanor that tells you he's not here for drama, he's here for facts. I walked over, handed him the folder without saying much. He took it, nodded slightly, then started walking the fence line. He moved slowly, shining the light along the cut wire, crouching slightly to look at where it had been folded back, then following the tire tracks into the field. Every step measured, every detail noted without needing to say it out loud. "You live here?" he asked after a moment. "Yes, sir. This fence was intact before tonight." "It was." He nodded again, then flipped through the documents, pausing briefly at the survey map. The beam of his flashlight traced the boundary, then lifted toward the cars sitting in rows like they belonged. That was the moment, the quiet confirmation. He closed the folder, handed it back to me, and gave a small nod toward the tow trucks. That was all the permission anyone needed. No big announcement, no raised voices, just a shift in the air, like a switch had been flipped. And then it started. The first truck rolled forward, lining up behind a dark SUV near the edge. The driver stepped out, hooked the chains with practiced ease, movement smooth, almost routine. Lift, slight pause. Then the front wheels came off the ground. It was almost quiet, except for the soft clink of metal and the low hum of the engine. Then the truck pulled away. One car gone. The second truck moved in right behind it. Same process, hook, lift, pull. And just like that, the pattern was set. Back at the restaurant, it took a minute for people to notice. At first, it was just confusion, someone stepping outside, looking around, maybe thinking they forgot where they parked. Then more people came out, voices rising, questions overlapping. "Where's my car? Did you move it? Was it towed?" Phones came out, screens lighting up faces that had been smiling just minutes earlier. You could feel the shift spreading, table by table, conversation by conversation, until the music didn't matter anymore. Out in the field, it was methodical. Lift, chain tow, lift, chain tow. Each truck taking another vehicle, pulling it out through the opening in the fence, back onto the road where it would disappear into the night. I stood off to the side, arms relaxed, watching it unfold. Not enjoying it, but not regretting it either. There's a difference. After about the fifth or sixth car, the first group of customers made their way over, following the movement like it might lead them to answers. One guy, mid-30s, still holding a drink, walked straight up to me. "Hey man," he said, trying to keep his tone friendly but failing a little. "Do you know what's going on?" "They're towing cars." I nodded once. "Yeah, those cars are on my property." He blinked, processing that. "Wait, what?" "They're parked on land they don't have permission to use." His expression shifted, confusion turning into something closer to frustration. "But the restaurant told us to park there." I shrugged slightly. "Then you should probably talk to the restaurant." That didn't go over well. He looked back toward the building, then at the tow trucks, then back at me, like he was trying to decide where to put the blame. Eventually, he muttered something under his breath and walked off, already pulling out his phone. More people followed, some angry, some just lost, all of them realizing at the same time that their night had just gotten a lot more complicated. And then, right on cue, the man himself showed up. Victor Langston came pushing through the crowd, tie loosened, face flushed, moving fast in that way people do when they're trying to stay in control but already losing it. He walked straight toward the nearest tow truck, waving his arms. Hey, you can't do that." The driver didn't even look up, just kept working. Victor turned, scanning, until his eyes landed on me. And you could see it, that split second where recognition clicked, where everything connected. He walked over, quick, sharp steps. "What is this?" he demanded. "You can't tow our customers' cars." I met his gaze, calm, steady. "You cut my fence." For a moment, just a moment, he didn't respond. like his brain needed a second to catch up with the sentence. "What are you talking about?" he said, but it wasn't as confident now. I gestured toward the opening in the fence, the clean cut, the folded wire. "That," I said. "My property. My fence. Your solution." He turned and looked at it, really looked this time. And I watched the change happen in real time. The anger didn't disappear, but it shifted, mixed with something else. Realization. Behind him, another car lifted off the ground. He looked back at me, jaw tight. "We needed parking. It's one night." I shook my head slightly. It stopped being one night when someone cut through my boundary like it didn't matter. His eyes flicked toward the tow trucks again, then back to me. "You're seriously going to tow every single car?" I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. They're seriously parked on every inch of my land. And just like that, the balance shifted. Victor stood there for a second, just staring at me like he was trying to figure out if this was a bluff. Like maybe if he pushed hard enough, I'd fold, apologize, call the whole thing off. But behind him another car was already being lifted, chains tightening, metal clinking in that slow, final way that tells you there's no undo button left. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, voice lower now, controlled but tight, like he was trying to keep the situation from slipping out of his hands completely. "These are paying customers. You're going to ruin my opening weekend." I tilted my head slightly, not in a mocking way, just enough to show I'd heard him. "You ruined your own opening when you decided my land didn't belong to me." He exhaled sharply through his nose, glancing back toward the restaurant where people were now fully outside, clustered in small groups, phones pressed to their ears, some arguing, some just standing there in disbelief. The music inside had dropped off, either turned down or drowned out by everything happening out here. "This didn't have to go this way," he said, turning back to me, stepping a little closer. "We could have talked about it." I let that sit for a moment, not because I needed to think, but because I wanted him to hear it the way I did. "We are talking about it," I said. "You just waited until after you cut through my fence." That landed harder than anything else I'd said so far. You could see it in his face, that quick flash of frustration mixed with something like embarrassment, because now it wasn't just between me and him. There were witnesses, dozens of them. Another tow truck rolled past us, hauling a silver sedan out through the opening. A woman followed behind it, half jogging, shouting into her phone. "They took it." I'm not kidding, they actually took it. Victor ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, twice, then stopping in front of me again. "All right," he said, tone shifting, trying a different angle. "We'll fix the fence. I'll have someone out here first thing in the morning. Better than it was before. You've got my word." I shook my head. "No." It came out simple. Flat. Final. He blinked, caught off guard. "No. No." He looked genuinely confused now, like he hadn't expected resistance at that level. "Why not? That solves the problem." "It fixes what you broke," I said. "It doesn't address what you did." Behind him, another car disappeared. That's when the offers started changing. "All right, fine," he said quickly, adjusting again, thinking on his feet. "What if we make it official? I'll lease the land from you. Temporary, just weekends. You'd make good money off it, and we wouldn't have to deal with this every time we're busy." I almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it told me exactly how he saw the situation. Like this was still a negotiation he could win if he found the right number. "You don't get to create the problem," I said, "and then sell me the solution." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, frustration creeping back in. "Then what do you want?" That question hung there for a second, heavier than anything else that had been said. Because up until now, this had all been reaction. But this was the moment it turned into terms. I glanced past him, watching as one of the last few cars in the far corner got hooked up, the field slowly returning to what it was supposed to look like. Open, empty mine. Then I looked back at him. "I want it put back the way it was," I said. "And I want to know it stays that way." He frowned slightly. "That's what I just said. We'll fix the fence." "Not patch it," I replied. "Rebuild it. Steel posts. Reinforced wire. A proper gate. Lock." He hesitated. Not because he couldn't do it, but because now it was becoming real cost, real accountability. "And," I continued, "I want barriers on your side. Permanent ones. Something that makes it physically impossible for anyone to accidentally end up on my property again." His jaw tightened. "That's excessive." I shook my head once. What's excessive is cutting through someone else's land and calling it convenience. Another pause. "And you cover everything." I added. Fence, labor, damage to the ground. Any fees from tonight? All of it. He let out a slow breath, looking away for a second, doing the math in his head. You could almost see the numbers stacking up behind his eyes. And we put it in writing. I finished. Signed. Clear. You don't use my land again. Not for parking, not for overflow, not for anything. Silence settled between us, broken only by the distant hum of engines and the occasional raised voice from someone still trying to figure out where their car had gone. Victor looked back at me, and this time there wasn't any pretense left. No charm, no casual confidence, just a man realizing he'd pushed something too far and now had to deal with the consequences. That's a lot, he said quietly. I nodded. So was cutting my fence. For a long moment, he didn't say anything, just stood there, shoulders slightly slumped now, watching as the final car got pulled out of the field. That was the moment it clicked for him. Not when I said it, not when the officer nodded, but when there was nothing left to argue over. No cars, no leverage, no illusion that this would just go away. All right, he said finally, voice lower, resigned. We'll do it. I held his gaze for a second, making sure there was no hesitation left. Get it done right, I said, or we do this again. He gave a small, tight nod. It'll be done. And just like that, it was over. The tow trucks cleared out one by one. Their work finished as quietly as it had started. The police officer gave me a final nod before heading back to his cruiser. The crowd slowly thinned, people leaving on foot, calling rides, dealing with the aftermath of a night that didn't go the way they planned. And my field was empty again. Not perfect. Tire tracks cut through the grass, patches pressed down where cars had sat, but it was mine. Undeniably, unmistakably mine. Over the next week, Victor followed through. I'll give him that. Crews came out early, tore down what was left of the old fence, and built something stronger in its place. Steel posts driven deep, thicker wire pulled tight, a solid gate installed with a heavy lock that clicked shut with a kind of finality I appreciated more than I expected. On his side, concrete barriers went in, not pretty, but effective. No gaps, no shortcuts, no easy solutions left. They even put up signs directing customers to a proper parking area a few blocks down. It wasn't as convenient, but it wasn't my problem anymore. And for a while, that was that. Things settled. The restaurant stayed busy, just a little more organized now. People adapted, like they always do. Life moved on. But every now and then, I'd catch someone slowing down near the fence, looking out at the field like they were trying to understand what had happened there. And I'd wonder what version of the story they heard. Because from my side, it was simple. Someone crossed a line, and I put it back. From his side. Maybe I was the guy who towed 30 cars over a piece of grass. And maybe that's where it gets complicated. Because here's the truth. I could have handled it differently. I could have walked in, made a bigger scene, demanded they clear the lot, given them a warning. Maybe they would have listened, maybe they wouldn't have. But I keep coming back to that fence. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't someone misunderstanding where to park. Someone made a choice, a clean, deliberate cut through a boundary that was already there. And once that happens, once someone shows you they're willing to ignore what's yours because it's easier for them, you don't really get to pretend it's a small thing anymore. You either let it slide, or you make sure it doesn't happen again. I chose the second one. But I'll ask you this, because I still think about it sometimes, more than I expected I would. Was that the right call? Not legally, that part's clear. I mean personally, morally. Was it justice, or was it overkill? Because yeah, I got my land back. I got a better fence, a signed agreement, and a neighbor who won't cross that line again. But 30 people went home that night angry, confused, out a couple $100 in towing fees, and they didn't cut that fence. So where does that line sit for you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think. And if you've ever had someone push past a boundary like it didn't matter, I'd be real curious how you handled it, or how you wish you had. And if you want more stories like this, real situations, messy lines, no easy answers, hit like, subscribe, stick around. Because sometimes the quietest response ends up being the loudest one people remember.